Welcome, everyone, to this dialogue entitled Civics, News, and Nonprofits. I'm Susan Haig, Vice President and Founding Trustee of CivicStory, a nonprofit newsroom advancing solutions-based news about ecology and civics in New Jersey. We are very grateful for sponsorship from the New Jersey Council for the Humanities for this forum. Our panelists are speaking today as citizens, not as representatives of their organizations. Our big thanks to our four speakers. And if each of you can wave hello, we'll welcome Micah Anglin, a policy analyst for the Green and Healthy Homes Initiatives, Linda Zippo, Executive Director of the New Jersey Center for Nonprofits, Sarah Gamard is Program Manager for the Elections and Democracy Initiative at the University of Vermont's Center for Community News, and Tristan Weisenbach, Senior at the College of New Jersey and managing editor of The Signal, which is one of the oldest college weekly newspapers, printing biweekly. Thanks to all of you. Our first round of questions considers the civic role of nonprofit news, civic meaning pertaining to the whole community. So Tristan, let's start with you. What are the basic differences between nonprofit 501c3 entities and for-profit businesses? And we understand there's a huge diversity in both these types of corporations, but if you can just summarize for us.
Sure. So a couple of the biggest differences is that nonprofit organizations are tax exempt. They do not pay income taxes, whereas private companies do. The second difference is that private companies usually get most of their income from sales of goods and services, whereas nonprofits have a much more diversified revenue source. So not only do they sell goods and services, but they also accept donations and they receive grants. Nonprofits also are governed by a volunteer governing board, which if you were to compare that to a private company, if a private company has a board of directors for say, usually they are paid by the company, they are not volunteer. Another big difference is that nonprofits are not privately owned, whereas private companies are. It may seem kind of obvious, but a lot of people may think that a nonprofit company is privately owned. However, that is not the case.
Thank you so much. Okay, over to Sarah. Tell us what's unique about this large cohort of faculty across the country that you're working with. They're training students in election reporting. How does this work? And how do you know it's engaging citizens?
It might be easiest if I show you guys. Would it be possible to share my screen? This will be faster than explaining it. But yeah, this is our Elections and Democracy Initiative. We have assignment templates that we hand out to faculty. And you can see on this webpage, these are all free for faculty to use across the country. We have about 160 plus participants right now. It's probably over 100 colleges at this point, and it's growing by the day. This is the first time we've ever launched a project like this. So we're pretty happy with the results so far. What we're doing is we're just trying to make it easier for faculty to help their students fill gaps in local news coverage. We like to see them filling gaps where local newsrooms can't do it themselves. So for example, covering the school board races that newsrooms don't have time to cover, or covering the sheriff's race, or diving deep into a particular candidate who probably should be vetted. It's actually been pretty successful so far. This link to our national community newswire has a whole election hub that shows student reporting from across the country related to the election. It's man-on-the-street interviews, talking to voters in swing counties, explainers on how to vote, how to get registered. You name it, these students are doing it. They're working with faculty to do it. We do have proof that local newspapers are picking up this content. So it's not just going to student media. We have partnering newsrooms like, for example, Gannett Sites or others who will pick up these stories. They have an agreement with the school where they pick up the stories and the student gets a byline in a real newspaper, and the newspaper often gets free content. Sometimes the students are even paid by the school because they are acting as professionals. And yeah, it's a win-win-win. So the students get good clips and the newspapers get affordable content that they otherwise wouldn't have, that is necessary information for the citizenry, and then the citizenry gets necessary information about the election.
That is great. Congratulations. It was really exciting to learn about it, and it was exciting to see how collaborative, gracious, helpful this group was to one another. Micah Anglin, as a young professional working with a nonprofit, large nonprofit, how does your work mesh with your goals for social change? And can you tell us a little bit about the policies you're analyzing?
My biggest avenue for social change is making sure that people have autonomy in their decisions and making it as easy as possible to feel like they're a part of change. With my work for DHHI, analyzing currently a program called Solar for All, which is a DC program that enables low and moderate income households to receive solar panels and retrofit their houses and their roofs, all paid for by the DC government. And it's a whole house approach. So it's not just retrofitting their solar panels, but you can't put a solar panel on a bad roof, right? And so doing the whole house approach, tackling the walls, tackling lead paint, tackling your stairs if you're elderly, tackling it all at once because people don't have the time and the resources to go to individual, vendors and deal with it by themselves.
Excellent. Congratulations. Linda Zippo, the New Jersey Nonprofit Voter Guide recently came out. It's impressive. How is it going?
This is an ongoing educational kind of thing. We always encourage nonprofits to be involved in the public policy space in lots of different ways. And there are so many different ways that nonprofits can do that. And nonprofits have a really important perspective to contribute there. And voter engagement, nonpartisan voter engagement, very, very important, has to be nonpartisan because nonprofits can't engage in electioneering. At least 501c3 nonprofits can't. But there's a lot of work that can be done in that space. And it can be anything from encouraging your staff and your volunteers and your constituents to register to vote or provide nonpartisan information along those lines, giving your staff time off to vote on election day or when in the days leading up. And the beauty of it is Nonprofit Vote has some great statistics that show that nonpartisan voter engagement does in fact increase voter participation. Nonprofits as a structure exist for the public good, and that's why nonprofits exist. It's carved in statute, and then when you get to 501c3s, it's even more along those lines: charitable, religious, educational, etc. So everything, in terms of governance, programming, etc., is kind of through that lens.
So our next questions relate to the broader purpose of news. What are we amplifying and why? So we'll start with Tristan again. This is a pretty big question. What to you is the ideal role of nonprofit news in our democracy?
In terms of nonprofits' role in our democracy and in terms of news coverage, a nonprofit has to create a sense of community. And they also, as Linda mentioned earlier, they are prohibited from participating in any partisan political campaigns. So they should have more of a role in encouraging voting in a nonpartisan way and getting people engaged into the whole election cycle and being involved as a citizen in a nonpartisan way, which I think is very, very important.
Thank you. Sarah, as a journalist, you actually said your work in commercial news was harder than hiking the entire Appalachian Trail. That was a strong statement. But can you describe your ideal work as a journalist in the future? And what would you choose to amplify if you were running a big newsroom?
I think anyone who's ever worked in a newsroom could write a whole essay about how they would do it differently because I've never met a journalist that is satisfied with the way their newsroom works and what they're covering. I would staff it with 5 to 10 times more reporters than a typical newsroom has. Staff them and then resource them. I think that would inherently just make a better paper. You'd have more boots on the ground actually covering things. But in a non-fantasy world, I would say just an emphasis on watchdog reporting, holding local officials accountable, emphasis on local reporting. One of my favorite newsrooms today is ProPublica. I think part of what makes them special is they're taking their time to really dig into stories that they just have a nose for news and they know what's important. And it's not necessarily what they think is going to get the most eyes on the story or the most clicks, but it's, I think, what they just see as the most important. A lot of newsrooms, or at least in my experience, newsrooms' philosophies have been muddied by the need to make money through clicks.
And we'll also mention in a little bit, maybe a plug right now for inn.org, that there are 450 newsrooms now across the country. So Michael, as a person, again, newly in the professional sphere, would you say there are 2 sectors in general, professional sectors, public and private, or 3 distinct sectors, public, private, and independent nonprofit?
Yeah, I definitely think 3: public, private, and nonprofit. Nonprofits play a critical role in addressing gaps that the public and private sector often overlook, particularly in areas like social equity, community development, and environmental sectors. And while the public sector focuses on, providing, essential goods to everybody, they often are motivated by political agendas and bureaucracy, and can sometimes be slower to move and get people the resources they actually need, where nonprofits can step in. And I think that's the biggest difference between people often, combine public and nonprofit. And I think that's the difference.
And another question for you, Mike, because of your work specifically, would you say that environmental justice, or we could say ecology justice, could that be a unifying goal in our democracy?
Yeah, the past 2 days I've been at the Maryland Energy Summit conference, so basically Maryland's biggest energy conference, and that was brought up as key examples by everybody, right? These storms and the need for people in that room, those actors, those politicians, those energy people and nonprofits to be doing this work. And we know that it's going to hit, marginalized communities the hardest, right? People that don't have the resources to get out of town. And we need to be able to protect people that have historically not been at the table to voice their opinions on their surrounding environments. And so, yes, I think that environmental justice needs to be a unifying thing because it affects everybody, right? I don't care if you're a private business. I don't care if you're a nonprofit. Nothing's going to run if you don't have a building to be in or a house to be in, right? It's not an issue that, sees color or gender. It is an issue that is going to affect every single person on this planet. And so we need to work on it.
Thank you for that, Mike. And congratulations on just being able to land a job that has you in a space that has just such a compelling mission and work. Linda, can you give us your take on the growth of nonprofit newsrooms in the US, just from a handful in 2010 to 450 plus?
I find it very encouraging. I mean, we just talked a little bit about the hardships that newsrooms have been facing. Nonprofit structure does provide an alternative, and in some cases a very promising one. Nonprofits they're certainly not the only mechanism for change and for improving communities and for improving lives, but I certainly think they're a very important one. So, history has shown that there's a big role to be played, and we want to think more recently, think about the census and the 2020 census, and nonprofits played a really tremendous role as trusted partners in communities at engaging people who might otherwise have been overlooked or excluded or marginalized to encourage participation. And New Jersey had a really strong effort in that regard, and it was shown in terms of the ability to get out the count. That's just one example.
Well, congratulations on your leadership of a really robust service organization. And we hope everybody does take a look at the New Jersey Nonprofit Voter Guide. It's very impressive. So we're very glad to introduce Holly Laren, CivicStory's videographer and media manager, who will take charge of moderating the Q&A. So over to you, Holly. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. If you could just keep your questions short, and you can raise your hands or you can use the hand raise function, and I'll just call on you.
Floor is open for our wonderful panel. Marion, I'm sure you have a question. CivicStory's secretary, board secretary.
So I guess I've been involved with nonprofits, but I really didn't understand what they were until, I was an adult and became the secretary of CivicStory. So how do we get young people to understand that this is, maybe Micah, this is for you. You had your parents as role models, that the nonprofit world is a wonderful place to look for employment.
Yeah, I think a lot of people think, hear nonprofit and they hear exactly that, nonprofit, no money. And so trying to find creative ways to go on college campuses and show the work that they're doing and that you can make a good salary and rise in that field. But when we're talking about jobs and showing people what's possible, you're going to have to find creative ways to go on to not just college campuses, but to other, places where young people are and show them career paths. One of the major things I credit Howard for with the School of Businesses is that those businesses come to Howard and recruit people and recruit them and show them an easy, stepping ladder to how you can rise in this field. Mm-hmm. And it's not going to look the same because, Goldman Sachs has a lot more money than, a lot of nonprofits. But the first thing you're going to have to do is show them that this is a career that's worthwhile, which I think people get because of social issues, but show them that they can rise and grow in that career.
That there is a career path,
Yeah, exactly.
not just volunteering.
Yeah, exactly.
The nonprofit world really is a place of action because it's so focused on social change and trying to convince people to do things differently. If the businesses go to the colleges to recruit, and the nonprofits need to do the same thing. So.
Right, exactly.
I have a question. I was interested in what folks had to say about where they get their news and how many young people are getting their news through social media in addition to kind of traditional media. And I wonder, is that worrisome for anybody that that's where many people are getting their news and making their decisions, I guess?
I can weigh in on that. This has been the case for like 10 years now. People traditionally get their news from Twitter. They wait for breaking news from Twitter, and reporters know that, so they will break news on Twitter before filing the same story to their editor. So the industry is privy to it. It depends on what you're worried about, because on the one hand, if verified news organizations with real reporters are using social media to get the news out, that's in a way combating misinformation. But if the question is, are we worried that people are going to social media in the first place for their news, for any news source? Maybe. Because if they don't know how to distinguish between a verified news source and a non-verified news source, yes, I am worried about that. But I think it's actually great, given the circumstances, that verified news sources are using social media to reach a wider audience. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I agree with you on the second point.
Yeah, I think you definitely have a right to be worried about that, but hopefully there's a solution.
I could also build off of that, off of what Sarah said about being able to kind of determine what is a trusted source on social media. I think it's important to realize that the social media 5 years ago is not the social media today. In terms of platforms like Instagram or X, formerly Twitter, that blue check mark doesn't necessarily mean that it's a verified source anymore. That means someone paid $10 a month to get the blue check mark. So you have to kind of take what you read with a grain of salt, no matter whether they have a check mark verification or not.
Yeah, you'd have to be following the reporters that you know are actually the reporters. And that's always been the case for Twitter. But yeah, Tristan's right. And I think the part of the issue now is that students that you're teaching, any American citizen, media literacy is just as important now as regular literacy.
And Eric had a question in the chat. Given the earlier comments about local news specifically, what are some local opportunities panelists are excited about or would hope to see that our nonprofit partners could get involved in or get behind?
Hi, Dale. Just posted it in the chat. I wanted to mention the New Jersey Civic Information Consortium, which is a funder, big funder in the state of, and created by statute here in New Jersey, of local journalism and nonprofits that are engaged in this work. So there's some really neat partnerships that have been going on. Nonprofits have their own unique perspective based on their missions to contribute to the public debate, to the public discourse, and journalism can, elevate that work and rely on nonprofit expertise. And there's just a lot of synergies when it comes to public dealing with systemic inequities, when we're really trying to elevate the perspectives and issues that have been ignored for far too long in mainstream media. There are a lot of different possibilities here that can be really encouraging and a huge public service.
If I could add, New Jersey is really a kind of powerhouse petri dish because we also have the Center for Cooperative Media, the CCM at Montclair State, which has really quickly become national and a global center of documenting media collaboratives. And we're grateful for these opportunities right in New Jersey.
Yeah, to piggyback on Susan and Linda, no matter where you are in America, no matter what state you're in, it's likely that there's either a nonprofit newsroom already launched or they're trying to launch one, or a combination of both. And they could always use help, probably fundraising or any sort of volunteer work to just get the word out about them.
Well, this has been great. Thank you, Holly, for moderating the Q&A. Thanks so much to the New Jersey Council for the Humanities. Please check out their wonderful website, their rich approach to public humanities, which has everything to do with democracy and civics. Thank you so much to our panelists for taking your valuable time. Congratulations on all your work and projects. We invite you all to subscribe to CivicStory's newsletter, and we invite you all to stay in touch. Check out civicstory.org. And again, thank you so much for being part of this conversation.